The Lights, Action, Impact presentation from NZ Onia, Te Māngai Pāho and the New Zealand Film Commission was recorded live during the 2025 Spada Conference.
Kei aku iti, kei aku rahi, kei aku whakatamarahi ki te rangi, kei aku whakateitei ki te whenua, tēnā koutou. Kei ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohe, o tēnei takiwā, tēnei te mihi. Ki ngā kaiwhakahaere o tēnei huihuinga, Spada, tēnā koutou. Ki o mātou kairangahau, New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, me Varian. Me kore ake koutou e whakatutuki ai tēnei wawata, te wāhi, o te rangai pāpāho ki te hanga o te ohanga me te ahurea o Aotearoa. Tēnei te mihi. Tēnei mātou ko irirangi te motu, ko te Māngai Pāho, ko te tumu whakaata taonga e mihi atu nei kia koutou. E te rangai pāpāho e pai mai nei tēnā koutou. O tira huri noi tō tātou whare, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Ko Ruha Anderson tōku ingoa ko te hautu te hiringa ki te Māngai Pāho. I lead in data and reporting at te Māngai Pāho and was part of this Mahi Tahi rangahau. And I'll hand it over to my colleague Taylor Hancock, who will speak to the economic impact research component of this mahi.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Taylor Hancock. I'm Senior Advisor Policy and Performance at Te Tumu Whakaata Taonga, the New Zealand Film Commission. So this year, the New Zealand Film Commission, New Zealand On Air and Te Māngai Pāho commissioned NZIER and Varian to analyse the role of screen production in shaping New Zealand's economy and culture. So this work forms part of Mahi Tahi, which is a collaborative effort between the three agencies to support and strengthen the screen sector in Aotearoa. And it is a piece of research that we plan on conducting every 2 years. So ahead of publication of the report, today we are going to share some high-level findings from the research, and then we will follow this with a conversation with NZ On Air CEO Cam Harland, where he will talk about the three agencies' collaborative response to the findings. So the research covers three areas. It looks at economic activity in New Zealand screen production. It looks at the cultural impact of New Zealand screen production and also how our screen content influences global perceptions of Aotearoa. So for context, we have defined screen production in this research as content made for cinematic release, television broadcast and streaming or on-demand platforms. It doesn't include gaming. So I will start by talking to some of the economic findings, which was conducted by NZIER. So the economic analysis uses a market value-based approach, drawing on published statistics, industry data, and a wide range of secondary data sources. The scope of the economic analysis focuses on four key areas. So it looks at GDP, which is the total economic contribution to national output. It looks at labour market trends, so this includes employment levels, wage structures and workforce dynamics. Private investment, including capital flows and investment activity, and it also looks at export earnings and contribution to tourism. So what this approach does is it allows us to understand not just the direct financial impact of the industry, but the much broader role that the industry plays in New Zealand's economy. So let's start with looking at GDP. I just want to note that GDP measures capture It's important to note that GDP measures capture only direct value added, so they do not reflect wider spillover effects into other industries such as tourism, hospitality or technology. And that's why it's important that we do this much broader economic analysis. So for the year ending March 2025, the screen industry contributed an estimated 1.1 billion to New Zealand's GDP and 3 billion in output. This is quite modest at around 0.3% of the national total. However, compared with other creative sectors, screen production is much more export-oriented, and it plays a key role in New Zealand's international brand. The sector's contribution is also really labour-intensive, so with around 5,000 waged employees and many more contractors sustaining an output over 1 billion, this is a relatively high value added per worker compared with other service sectors. Now, we are aware that the last financial year was a peak year, which was driven by major international productions and favourable global conditions. And since then, the sector has hit a downturn. We know that production volumes have contracted, international investment has slowed, and many screen sector businesses are facing significant challenges. So because of this, these findings might feel a little bit out of step with what many are experiencing in the sector at the moment. So given this data should be interpreted not as a static snapshot, but as part of a much longer-term story of fluctuation, resilience, and strategic opportunity. So looking at the graph, we can see there's a clear dip in output when COVID hit. As we all know, production slowed dramatically and output fell during this time. But what really stands out is the recovery. So the industry bounced back strongly and it now exceeds pre-pandemic levels. So these sharp changes that I'm talking about show just how volatile screen production can be, with boom years followed by busts, shaped by global cycles and policy settings. But volatility in GDP isn't a weakness. It reflects global production cycles. Peaks occur when major international projects are underway. Troughs happen during lulls or disruptions like the pandemic. So this research is really vital because understanding these cycles can help us plan strategically so we can leverage the peaks and build resilience during the troughs. Okay, turning to workforce. So the screen industry operates under a dual labour model. In the last financial year, we had almost 20,000 people, around 8,000 employees, and almost 19,000 contractors. So this structure gives us flexibility and helps us respond quickly to project-based work, but it also means that income and career progression can be unpredictable. Since 2012, employment has remained stable at around 8,000 people, providing a consistent core of waged work. Once again, there was obviously a noticeable decline during COVID, where workforce went down to about 6,800 employees, but this has recovered in the following years. The research shows us that permanent employment is more common in broadcasting and movie exhibition, while the project-based nature of production and post-production tends to favour towards contracting arrangements. Now, while the number of employees has remained relatively stable over the longer term, the number of businesses has risen steadily. So what this suggests is that many established businesses have faced challenges in scaling up, largely due to an unpredictable market, fluctuating project cycles, and funding constraints. At the same time, the industry has enabled the emergence of new micro and small-scale businesses, which can respond more flexibly to shifts in demand and the short-term nature of screen production contracts. So the research also looked at income levels. So over recent years, waged staff have consistently earned more on average than self-employed workers, and this reflects the stability and higher pay that come with salaried roles. So this graph here shows trends in average earnings across the industry. We can see that post-production services and other motion picture activities have the highest and fastest growing earnings. Another area of strong growth is motion picture and video distribution, which actually overtook free-to-air broadcasting since 2016. And this shift matches changes in how audiences watch content, with streaming and digital platforms driving demand for distribution expertise. By contrast, motion picture production and exhibition remain lower earning segments with gradual but steady increases over time. So when it comes to this workforce data, we are going to have access to much more information about cast and crew numbers and earnings, representation and demographic makeup with the introduction of the Everyone Project Aotearoa, which is another Mahi Tahi initiative that we will be launching in January next year. And this tool is going to give us the visibility that we need to track workforce trends much more accurately as we continue to conduct this research. So turning to investment, the sector continues to attract significant public and private investment, driving economic activity and growth. However, one of the limitations of this research is that the available data doesn't capture the full extent of private investment, and this is because some production spending and infrastructure investment remains confidential or unreported. But our New Zealand screen production rebate data shows that qualifying New Zealand production expenditure for international productions in the last financial year was $647 million. Live action productions make up most of the share of this expenditure. And by contrast, post-digital and visual effects projects, our PDV projects, while remain smaller in scale, continue to provide steady economic value, especially through employment and specialised services. Another thing that came through our NZSPR data in relation to PDV applications is that the number of these applications have generally trended upwards over time, but in the last financial year we actually saw quite a decrease. And while some fluctuation is expected, this decline may signal emerging challenges for the PDV field, and this is possibly due to growing international competition. So this breakdown highlights not only the scale of international investment flowing into New Zealand, but also the different ways that live action and PDV production stimulate economic activity. Both segments are vital. Live action productions bring large-scale spending and visibility, while PDV work supports ongoing employment and capability development in specialised areas. So I'm now going to hand over to Alana, who is going to talk about what this means for local production investment.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Alana Califa-Taylor taku ingoa, kei tumuaki whakawhiti kōrero me te rangahau ki Irirangi Tumotu. I'm Head of Communications and Research at New Zealand On Air and part of the Mahi Tahi trio. So let's start by looking at the change of the rebate settings in 2023 and what that did. And this is obviously in the New Zealand On Air context. So pre-2023, NZ On Air was funding 2 to 3 large-scale dramas a year, and that was to the tune of $6 or $7 million each, and to a sort of quantum of about 94% of the total budget. Then we see the ability to stretch the taxpayer dollars further kick in when the rebate changes came in. So since 2023-24, New Zealand On Air's been able to support 10 large-scale dramas with around $2.4 million per project. But the really exciting bit about that is that each of those projects brought in international dollars, and so that was to the tune of 40 million in non-government funding. So that's a really lovely multiplier effect. So this data is just one example of the way that local funding investment both underpins the sector by providing ongoing work, but also brings in that substantial additional investment. Really important for the government to know that their money is doing that. And this isn't just NZ On Air, it's a Mahi Tahi effort. New Zealand On Air, New Zealand Film Commission and Te Māngai Pāho are collectively backing local stories and talent to the tune of around 300 million plus in investments. And that ties in perfectly to the conference theme, love local, go global. Investing in local content isn't just cultural, it's economic, as we've seen. And it's about building a future where New Zealand's stories thrive both globally and locally. And importantly, this also delivers to the government's new Amplify strategy. So let's have a look at the impact of the trade of New Zealand screen content services. So obviously this also plays an important role. Imports of screen content have risen steadily. That's that nice sharp line rising up, but they've overtaken exports in 2023, and so we've seen quite a drop off there. So exports are remaining more volatile and are closely tied to the international production cycles, as Taylor's already talked about. Consumer demand dynamics, screen production volatility, global competition for incentives, and a mobile labour force are all driving industry imports and exports, so both sides of the equation. And this highlights the opportunities and challenges facing the screen industry. Imports have grown steadily, underlining the dominance of international content in the local market, something we'd like to change. And exports have been more volatile, but there's significant potential there for foreign earnings, as we've seen with that peak back in 2022-23. We have to acknowledge that we're exposed to international competition and shifting consumer preferences. The takeaway is we need strategies that grow export capability and ensure New Zealand content remains visible and competitive globally and domestically. So let's have a look at the streaming-led change and the impact that's having. So the rise of streaming platforms is reshaping how New Zealand screen content is financed, produced and consumed. And we've seen that really clearly in all of the Where Are the Audiences research over the last 11 years. While global services expand market reach, they also challenge the viability of traditional distribution and exhibition channels. So policy needs to adapt to ensure New Zealand retains both cultural visibility and economic value in this shifting environment. So the report discusses some key considerations in this space to allow New Zealand to retain both cultural visibility and economic value in the environment. The first consideration is encouraging streaming platforms to commission or acquire New Zealand content so that local stories can reach global audiences. Supporting co-productions also, and you saw before that change allowing domestic productions to qualify for the screen production rebate alongside NZ On Air funding has shifted the dial. There's a need to invest in marketing and digital promotion so that New Zealand audiences are aware of what's available in New Zealand. And many of you will know that New Zealand On Air is investing in this space now actively to try to sort of fill the gap. We also need to help New Zealand content to stand out in the crowded international streaming catalogues. So it needs to be visible and promoted on the likes of Netflix and Amazon, etc. And finally, there's a need to support innovation in cinema to sustain local audience engagement with film. So it's a really competitive environment, and here in New Zealand, the report suggests there must also be a focus on industry performance, and that includes building scale in businesses so that they can capture efficiencies and invest in innovation. strengthening skills and training pathways, and ensuring local content, especially Māori content, is visible in the global marketplace. And we'll hear a bit more about that from Ruiha shortly. Just another look also, this ties back to what Taylor was talking about with the GDP, but this is specifically that impact on tourism that the screen sector has. Tourism is a major part of the New Zealand economy. It's worth 17 billion in value added in the year to March 2024, and that's about 4.4% of GDP. Now, screen content plays a big role in putting our country and scenery on the world stage. 15.9% of international visitors said that screen content influenced their decision to come here, which translates to about 2.7 billion in tourism spend. So let's just add that neatly to that GDP figure, shall we? I don't know if that's how it works, but anyway. So that's a huge contribution from the screen industry to tourism, and we're just going to unpack that a little bit further. So this graphic is from Factors in Deciding to Visit New Zealand, the MB International Visitor Survey, June quarter 2025. And up the top you can see the two little pink bits are part of the 15.9% figure, so that's the combination of movies filmed in New Zealand, TV shows featuring New Zealand, and then we come down a little way to The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, still having impact however many decades later. But this is starting to wane as audiences, become less, the younger audiences become less familiar with that content. But let's not ignore right down the very bottom, that 43% line, 43.1%, who said they came to New Zealand because of the landscapes and scenery. How did they know about the landscapes and scenery, we ask? They saw it in screen content more than likely. So I think we can claim that one too. So this shows why ongoing local and international productions are vital for keeping New Zealand visible globally. Screen-driven tourism isn't just about nostalgia, it's about sustaining Aotearoa's global profile. Every time our landscapes and culture appear on screen, it reinforces New Zealand as a destination. Investing in local content is not just cultural, it's economic. And it supports jobs, tourism, and our international brand. #Love Local, Go Global. We're celebrating the stories that connect people here and attract visitors from around the world. So that brings us to some of the most powerful findings of this research, which is the cultural impact and how does New Zealand content shape who we are and how the world sees us. Ruiha.
Kia ora lana o tira, kia ora no tātou. This research goes to the heart of why our stories matter. They shape who we are and how the world sees us. The cultural impact study led by Varian combined quantitative and qualitative research conducted here in Aotearoa and across 5 other countries, being Australia, France, the UK, the US and India. We surveyed nearly 1,200 New Zealanders and over 500 international participants alongside an online qualitative forum. The cultural research explored 4 key areas. First, how local screen content contributes to identity and belonging for New Zealanders. Second, how we see ourselves and our communities reflected on screen. Third, the role that Māori culture plays in shaping perceptions of Aotearoa. And finally, how local screen content influences international perceptions of us. Internationally, the findings are clear. Our natural environment, our values, and Māori culture resonate strongly with global audiences. Crucially, these elements are what make our stories distinctive and authentic. And the results are compelling. Nearly 8 in 10 international viewers say New Zealand screen content sparks curiosity about our country, and 72% considered visiting as a result. Turning to Aotearoa now, here at home, local content is foundational to identity and belonging. 73% of New Zealanders agree that New Zealand-made content shapes national identity, with very few disagreeing. Belonging emerged as the strongest driver of cultural impact. Simply put, when people see themselves reflected on screen, it builds pride, connection, and optimism for the future. As one young participant aptly stated, local content plays a massive part in showing who we are. It helps define our culture, showcase our diversity, and shapes how Kiwis and the world sees New Zealand. Importantly, those most likely to feel the sense of belonging include Māori, Pasifika, speakers of Te Reo Māori, and those living in intergenerational households. As one participant reflected, local content shapes our national identity by showing what makes New Zealand celebrated. We can take pride in our landscapes, values, and cultural diversity. This brings us to a crucial finding of the research. Māori content is central to New Zealand's screen identity. It is not an add-on. Māori storytelling plays a defining role in shaping who we are and how the world sees us. Māori screen content is integral to cultural impact and our international reputation. The key qualitative insights highlight 5 distinctive benefits. First, it strengthens language revitalisation and cultural literacy. Second, it counters stereotypes and builds bridges between communities. Third, it brings untold narratives forward, shining a light on our history and challenges. Fourth, it evokes pride and strengthens identity for both Māori and non-Māori. In fact, 74% of New Zealanders agree it is an important part of our national identity. And finally, it builds understanding and cohesion for all New Zealanders. One participant shared, showing Māori perspectives on historical events is really important to ensure that both sides of the story are told. It helps us think critically about our history and understand its impact on society. And internationally, this impact is profound. Māori storytelling is recognised as a distinctive strength. 87% of international viewers say Māori stories help them value Indigenous storytelling more broadly. Furthermore, 83% agree it gives New Zealand a distinctive voice in global film and television. And 84% agree it plays an important part in how New Zealand is perceived internationally. Now, my final slide, finally, screen content plays a pivotal role in reflecting communities that have often felt underrepresented. While progress has been made in showcasing Māori, Pasifika, and broader Kiwi experiences, gaps still remain. Only about 1/3 of disabled communities feel their experiences are reflected. Equally, Asian communities say there is not enough space for their stories. And for our LGBTQI+ communities, just 34% agree that their experiences are reflected. As one participant put it, local content helps define our culture and showcase our diversity. And that very authenticity is what draws people in. Ultimately, when people see themselves reflected on screen, it fosters belonging, deepens understanding, and strengthens social cohesion. So to summarise, local content is more than mere entertainment. And these insights underscore the importance of continued investment in local screen production as a means of both economic development and cultural expression. Findings from all phases of the research show that New Zealand and Māori screen content play an important role in shaping national identity, supporting belonging and inclusion, and contributing to social connection and international engagement. And on that note, I'll wrap it up here. The research will be published in the coming weeks and will be available across all 3 agencies' websites. And I'll now hand it over to Cam and Irene to talk about what this all means and how the Mahi Tahi agencies plan to respond. Kia ora tātou.
Thanks, presenting team. That was really great. Cam, there's some pretty amazing data there. Maybe not anything like really new, but just great to have it all presented like that and at our fingertips for use when we're lobbying, etc.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Do you have any just general comments off the back of it to get us going?
Yeah, I think the starting point is what a fantastic job. A lot of the things I thought I was going to have to say up here have already been conveyed in the presentation, which is brilliant. So thanks, team. I think this is a piece of research that's pretty unique. I don't know that there's any other territory out there that's combined a piece of economic research with a cultural piece of research, and not only a cultural piece of research, but a piece of research that's asking for New Zealanders' views of screen content and international audiences' views of our screen content as well. So it's I think it's a really thorough piece of work. As Taylor said at the start, we do want to do it on a fairly regular basis. I think the one thing, if Annie was here, I think the one thing she would say was a concern she had about the fact that it's, from an economic point of view, probably conveying a more positive sense of what's happening in the sector than is what's happening right now. And that is writ large in the research. So I think we're making it clear that a lot of the data that we're drawing on is from the past, right? So the economic information that we're pulling on is rebates being paid, which obviously is paid at the end of production activity as opposed to what's happening in the sector now. So I think that's an important caveat to the economic piece. For me, I think the real highlight is just the superpower that we have around the cultural aspect of the screen content that we make.
Was there anything that actually surprised you?
Probably that piece. I'm not sure that there's anything that's startlingly surprising in the research as a whole. I think the importance. I think the resonation from international audiences about Māori culture and that being imbued in our screen content, I thought was a really great, really useful thing for us to have, if I'm honest. And coming back to that point about thank you. The idea behind this research is that it is used to perhaps inform policy, assist in conversations that need to be had around, why.
It is very helpful for us at Spada, with our government advocacy and, things like I was talking about this morning about advocating for changes to the domestic rebate and all of those kinds of things. Any information like this is very helpful. Is there anything that the agencies, NZONIA and the others, I know you've spoken to Annie and Larry, is there anything that you might do differently or do more of because of the findings?
I'm sure there will be. I think there's one really key finding that came out of the research, which won't come as a surprise to a number of you that have been in the industry for a while, which is a lack of really good quality employment data. So Stats New Zealand used to do a survey annually that was specific to the screen industry, and they stopped doing that in about, I want to say 2015. And that's actually made it a lot more difficult to pull a lot of this information out for the economic modelling. And I think the three agency CEOs have actually got together and said that's a massive missed opportunity. Taylor mentioned before the Everyone Project Aotearoa, which is something that's going to be rolling out quite soon. That'll give us some granular information about the people that are involved in the sector. But Stats was really that macroeconomic, what are people earning, what's the size and scale of the industry. I think we definitely need to fix that.
Yeah, I agree. I can't remember the year that we lost that data, but it has made quite an impact. You really do need to know that kind of information. You saw very strongly in the results the impact since we had the change where you could use the domestic screen production rebate with NZONIA funding. Obviously it's had a really positive impact, but I'm also aware that it's still super hard for producers getting those productions together, getting those deals together, getting the global investment, etc. It's been a bit of a learning curve for all of us, opening that up. How would you say it is going at the moment, and where are we heading with getting that to work as best it can, really?
Yeah, I've said this a few times, it's been a game changer for us on many levels, because it has meant we're able to support more productions, more ambitious productions, budgets are increasing, quality is fantastic, but it's hard. We really know how hard it is, and to find that international money, we just saw the co-production kind of conversation up here before. I think that's another thing that Mahi Tahi will bring us. So we've always been fairly constrained because our legislation is so narrow. That's NZ On Air. Our ledge is about delivery of local content to local audiences. The Film Commission's remit's broader. But under Mahi Tahi, we can come together and say, well, look, let's take a broader remit. We have an Amplify strategy, which is now government policy effectively, which we're required to take account of, that says, how do we help? How do we kind of lean into producers finding, I think one of the words that was said in the panel before is relationships, right? So how do we help grow relationships with those offshore production companies or financiers or whoever else might assist in continuing to grow, the multi-party kind of international productions that we want to see.
I mean, it's a critical area of our work at the moment. I've got a couple more questions for Cam, but I think we probably do have time if there's a couple of people in the crowd who've got absolutely burning questions. Karen McKenzie has a burning question. Oh, there's a microphone coming your way.
Don't ask me about macroeconomics.
No, I won't. Was I reading the income graph correctly? Are we looking at like 40, 50, 60,000, the average for most screen workers in the country? How does that compare? Am I right with that?
It looks unbelievably low, doesn't it? When you look at that graph, you go, how does that make sense? And I think that they are the things that is probably a macroeconomic question that I don't know the answer to, because it doesn't, I'm assuming that must include part-time people or whatever else, because an average of sort of 40,000 is below the living wage, right? We do know that the industry deals with a lot of kind of part-time fluctuating work, to be fair. So that could be true. I think that's probably something that we would need to look into a little bit more. It's funnily enough, I wrote it down myself when I saw that graph up there. It just stands out.
It's a really good question, Karen, and I think, it needs a little bit more drilling down into that one, doesn't it? Anything else that anyone's desperate to know? Here we go.
Holly.
Over there.
More about what the domestic spur settings are that you're lobbying for.
Well, that's a me question.
And who you're consulting with to decide what you're lobbying for.
Mostly just our own industry, and I'm very, very very open to hearing if anyone wants to email me with any suggestions, or Sandy. It'll generally be things around getting the above the line, similar to what they just did with the international, things around budget thresholds, market attachment amounts, and possibly getting international formats that are very New Zealandised to be eligible, which they have not historically been. That's very broad-based. If you've got more specifics that you'd like us to think about, please send them to us, because we are just getting that all together.
What does that look like? Is it something you submit in a paper to the government?
We've kind of already done those bits. The next bit really is just to sit down with the minister and the ministry team and it really, really go through the nuts and bolts of it. And
form that had people on it that created that. I'm just wondering who to date hasn't provided that information.
Sandy and I have mostly worked on it with our own board, but we have also had input from various other members. And as I say, if you've got more to add it. Thank you. That was my question.
Just sitting back and
the questions are for him. Anything else? Yes, Tony?
Question for Cam. New Zealand Air's role, your emphasis on co-production, international money coming in. Where is the place for totally New Zealand funded production?
I think, without wanting to sound like I'm copping out, I think it's all about balance, right? So we have an act that, irrespective of the fact that we want to try and broaden our remit a little bit and encourage more ambition, because that's actually what we're being asked to deliver under Amplify and under the current kind of government settings. We still take very seriously the fact that we have Section 36C, which talks about delivering content for specific audiences. And we are a cultural agency, so we're not looking for everything to come in with a rebate. The point, though, is that it has meant that our money can go further, and the problem we've had over various years is we just don't have enough money, and we're seeing more and more fantastic applications coming in that we can't fund. So the rebate change has meant that we can spread our money a little bit, a bit broader. But the reality is we also know that not everyone's going to be able to do that. Not every producer is going to be able to come in and tie together a multi-party international financing plan. So we're looking to kind of find a balance.
Probably take one more from the gang. Can't see who that is, but yes.
So I'm a bit fixated on the low income level for screen workers, so I'm circling back to that. I'm wondering, since there hasn't been data tracked since 2015, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity in future times that you pull data that you could do a callback to try and understand how many people have left the industry recently, or since 2015, how many are solely receiving income from the screen sector, or are they depending on other income sources to survive, or partners, or some other kind of revenue stream? I think it would be really great to get a very clear snapshot on that. Next to a lot of creatives are working free labour in order to get their projects up and running a lot more part-time, a lot more gig economy, and a lot of educational institutions educating people in order to go into the screen sector where there really isn't a lot of opportunity. So I'm wondering if there's a way to capture some kind of data around that.
Yeah, I think there definitely is. As I said, it's probably the one most glaring absence from this work, to be honest, is that, hello?
Yeah, sorry. You might not know this. So Profile of Creative Professionals is a piece of research that we've partnered with Creative New Zealand on a couple of times, and we're doing it again early next year. So Profile of Creative Professionals, last time it came out, which I'm trying to remember how long ago it was, 2 to 3 years ago, did paint a pretty poor picture of incomes in the sector. There were, and as the data that Taylor presented showed, there were, the fixed the permanent employees, and they came through in the research as being reasonably well paid, but then there were all the gig economy workers who were washing dishes in the evening as well to sort of make ends meet, or relying on a partner with a regular income. So Profile of Creative Professionals gave us a much more detailed look at that, and we will get that again next year, and then we'll expect to be getting a lot more rich data from the Everyone project as that rolls out over the coming years.
No, thank you. And just to add to that, I can't speak on behalf of Annie and Larry, but I think when we did get together and realised that one of the things that was really sort of somewhat compromising the data of what we want to be an ongoing, every couple of year piece of macroeconomic sort of summary, is the lack of that stats information. I think we need to sort that out. So if that means that we need to find some money between us to get that up and running again, I think we will. It doesn't make sense for us to be so compromised.
Now, when you see the lovely James sitting over there, you know that you're very near the end of your session, because that's the cue. But just one last question, Cam. And just in case anyone doesn't know what we're talking about, when we talk about Mahi Tahi, that's obviously the 3 funding agencies working together on things. What else is happening in the Mahi Tahi space?
I've got a list here. So obviously the team were just talking about the Everyone project. You've just seen a tangible example with this research. We have pulled together a fairly formal framework that has gone to our board. I think it's going to the Film Commission board next week. Really very much in mind a more formal agreement around how we are going to continue to work together. Amplify as a strategy, I think, is kind of really expecting that of us. My board is particularly keen. Speaking honestly, I think that the merger conversation that we were talking about sort of this time last year is off the table at the moment. But the view we have is let's do the positive bits of what a merger would have been without worrying about the negative ones. So how can we work together for strategic funding initiatives, sector development? So we obviously all put in some money into the wonderful Activator program, which is just, there's a few producers in the room here that have engaged in that. That is amazing, and we definitely want to see that continue, and we want to see more of that. We definitely see kind of workforce development opportunities that we're kind of all working on separately. So there's kind of gaps and duplication that I think we can address by coming together and going, how might we kind of put a call out to the industry that is a consolidated piece of thinking that says, how do we support and develop below the line, or grow writing talent, or producers? I mean, we're all kind of using similar people. The list goes on. Devolved industry investment and initiatives run by guilds. So mental wellbeing, I think.
Guilds?
Well, I mean, I think like Kelly just was in the panel next door. That is relevant to all of us.
It is. It
so
absolutely
let's
is.
take a kind of consolidated view. Yeah.
And there's a smaller organisation that's very close to my heart, which is Greenlit, which is about greening the screen industry, and both NZ On Air and the Film Commission have helped with that. So that might be one we could have a cross-agency, feeling on as well. It's all good.
Thank you.
Working together is good. Thank you, Cam.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, panel.